Let's talk about the highest tax burden since the Second World War, shall we? The government is on course to oversee the biggest tax-raising parliament since records began. That's according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies analysis. Now, the IFS forecast that taxes will amount to about 37% of national income by the next general election due in 2024. That would be at a level, as I said, that hasn't been seen since 1948, which is just after the Second World War, when we had to rebuild everything after that dreadful war. Responding to this report, the Treasury spokesman said the most effective tax cut we can deliver is to drive down inflation. Well, many people are saying, well, you haven't driven it down that far, and also you shouldn't have caused it in the first place. Is that a fair and representative thing to say? Well, joining me now is Joe Ventura, who is Digital Campaign Manager at the Taxpayers Alliance. A very good morning to you.
Good morning, David. Thank you for having me on.
Absolute pleasure. This makes very sobering reading, doesn't it? The fact is that we have the biggest tax-raising parliament seen since the Second World War. I think people can feel that in their pocket. Again, this is on the eve of the Conservative Party conference. This isn't going to make great reading for Rishi Sunak and indeed the government.
No, it certainly isn't. And I think this comes fairly fresh off the claims from the Chancellor that there is apparently no room for tax cuts, which, of course, is something that we would dispute. And I think a lot of hard-working families across the country would dispute too.
Now, obviously, we're also hearing, there's another story which is in the Times this morning, Tories' shift to higher taxes may never be reversed. Why is that? Is it because government has got so gung-ho and very happy spending everyone's money, they're raking in more and more tax, they rather like it, they're going to keep the taxes there?
Well, on the face of it, David, that is what the case is. I mean, we know government expenditure is going through the roof. I mean, total managed expenditure in the last financial year, I believe, is going up over £100 billion every single year. So the government is taking on more and more liabilities and expecting taxpayers to foot a higher and higher bill. But what I would say is this is ultimately always a choice. It's the Chancellor's choice, it's the Prime Minister's choice to keep on with these enormous spending commitments and make all of us pay for it. And it's simply not on. And I think we have to challenge this narrative that this trajectory we're on of high taxes is inevitable, because quite frankly, it isn't.
So just before the break, I was talking to Sir John Redwood, who's advising the Prime Minister. When you look at the numbers, and if you want people to vote Conservative, when you look at these tax rises, it's going to cost every single household about £3,500. Now, then you're saying, right, give us £3,500, but by the way, we want your vote. Those two things don't add up to me.
Exactly, and I think what we hear from the government, which is basically that we've supposedly got to batten down the hatches and just wait this out while we deal with high inflation, is just for the birds. I mean, the problem with that narrative is it places all the responsibility on us, on hardworking taxpayers, the people watching and listening today, to deal with this and to sort of dig deep in their pockets. But none of that responsibility is then apparently shifted to government, who, as I said, increasingly ratchet up spending on projects which a lot of people would frankly find spurious. You know, whether that's increasing civil service headcount, whether that's enormous projects which are failing like HS2. And the government simply doesn't take any responsibility for that spending. And unfortunately, it's taxpayers who are expected to foot the bill for all this. It's ludicrous.
So, looking at the numbers, our national debt stands at 100.5% of GDP. That has tripled since 2000. It is on course to triple again by the 2070s. So, basically, we are then spending more and more money just servicing the debt we got ourselves into. If you were an individual and you had a fiscal policy like that, you would need debt advice counselling. What on earth is going on with the government? How can they believe they can do this? Because they're paying off the debt, or they're servicing the interest only on the debt. We've got huge bills coming in, like the NHS, which simply isn't fit for purpose. It cannot continue like this.
Well, no, exactly. And I think the debt interest itself, I believe that the spending for that is more than most government departments alone. It's absurd. And, you know,
it's second to the NHS.
That's right, yeah. So add to that as well all of the unfunded pension liabilities which the government is responsible for too, and that national debt is actually much higher even than it seems on the headline rates. So it feels like we're sort of in this spiral of really short-term thinking, and with the government thinking about how it can afford things which are coming up tomorrow, not in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time. And of course, the problem is only mounting. We're in this sort of snowball effect where taxpayers are supposed to take on more and more liability, and the problem is only going to get worse as years to come, unless there is a very necessary change of trajectory from a government, whoever that may be.
So obviously there are factions within the Conservative Party that are calling for different things. Liz Truss, much derided for her mini-budget, but at the Conservative Party conference, she is launching the Conservative Growth Group, or it has been launched, but she is speaking at this big event. She believes very much in lower taxes. Would you agree? I mean, my personal feeling about Liz Truss was that actually probably the direction of travel was right. She just did too much too quickly. She didn't tell people what she was doing, and the markets panicked.
Well, I agree that the general consensus of wanting to cut taxes on hardworking families was the right one. I think that's plain to see when you speak to people up and down the country who are struggling at the moment. But the problem, again, comes back to that issue with spending. You may remember, of course, at that time, there was the massive energy intervention. This is when energy bills were soaring through the roof. And the government committed to intervene on behalf of people to sort of cover those energy bills. And that, at the time, was projected to be one of the largest government interventions of all time. So we had this enormous spending commitment coming at a time when tax revenues, of course, would have taken a temporary fall. So I think that was primarily one of the reasons that things went so wrong there. But that absolutely should not discourage the principles of tax cuts. And if anything, I think it places more importance on concentrating on spending and getting spending down and balancing the books in that way.
Does the government listen to you?
We'd like to think so, but I mean, the tax burden itself would disagree. As mentioned at the top of this segment, we're heading for a 70-year high tax burden. And I think, there's plenty to listen to here. What we need to do is go for growth and ease that burden on households across the country who, contending with inflation and everything else, are having to put up with these arbitrary tax bills to fund a government which is just committed to out-of-control spending. They should listen if they're not already.
Joe, very good to talk to you. That's Joe Ventura there, Digital Campaign Manager of the Taxpayers Alliance.